Dr. Wallach is an expert on nutrition and longevity and is the famed author of the audio message, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, which has been heard by more than 50 million people. Get ready to learn and to laugh as Dr. Wallach shares some important facts that could very well save your life. And now, here is Dr. Joel Wallach.
Hooah! Since most of you heard the tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, I don't have to give a lot of introduction to myself other than to remind you the thing that makes my view different on health, I think, is that I'm a veterinarian as well as a physician. And in veterinary medicine, we don't have health insurance for animals like we do people. And if we were to use a human healthcare type of system for animals or livestock, it'd be sticker shock for you. Your hamburger would cost you $275 a pound. A boneless, skinless chicken breast would be $450 a pound. A dozen eggs would be $50 just to pay for the health care. So we learned a long time ago in the animal industry that we could keep the price of animal products such as meat and dairy and poultry and eggs down to where the average American could afford to eat them every day simply by eliminating health care cost. We do this in animals with simple little nutritional formulas, and that's why we have mouse pellets and rat pellets and hamster pellets and gerbil pellets and guinea pig pellets and rabbit pellets. We have canned and dried dog and cat food. We have pig pellets and sheep pellets and horse pellets and calf pellets and dairy pellets and ferret pellets and duck pellets and turkey pellets and trout pellets and catfish pellets and monkey pellets and pigeon pellets. I mean, every kind of animal you can think of that's been domesticated or used as a pet or a laboratory animal, we have pellets for. And the reason why we put animal feeds or animal rations into a pelletized form is so that every mouthful is perfect. Even the stupidest animal in the group gets a perfect diet. They can't sort through and just eat only the sunflower seeds or the raisins. Every mouthful is perfect. And we do that to standardize production. And it's been a real blessing for the agricultural industry. We were so successful that over the last 75 years, we were able to eliminate 900 different diseases. We've doubled and tripled lifespans of animals with these simple little nutritional formulas. And as a veterinarian, it always was kind of interesting to me that we didn't use that same technology for people. We only spent $100 billion figuring all this out for animals over a 75-year period, which is nothing, as you will see tonight, compared to what we spend for human health on a yearly basis. So it's a pittance to eliminate 900 different diseases in animals. Well, one of the things, before I became a physician, I was involved with a big research project with Marlin Perkins from the old Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom show. How many remember Marlin Perkins? Great gentleman. And I was really, really honored that he would think of me as a wildlife pathologist. I was in Africa actually doing conservation work, and he sent me a telegram, invited me back to the States in the mid-'60s because he had gotten a $7.5 million grant from the National Institutes of Health. And this was to study pollution in the environment and the world ecology. And my job on the project was to do autopsies of animals that died of natural causes in the big zoos around the United States, because big zoos tended to be associated with big cities. And if there was any pollution problems going on in the cities, there was bound to be an animal in the zoo population that would be sensitive to the pollution. And we could use that animal much like the old coal miners used to use canaries. You know, they'd take the canary down to the mine, and if a little gas or methane would leak into the mine, the canaries were much more sensitive than the men, and they would drop off the perch and die long before the men were in danger of blowing up or suffocating. So that was the purpose of the study. Well, to make a long story short, over some years, I had done 17,500 autopsies on over 454 species of animals and 3,000 human beings for comparison. And what I learned, ladies and gentlemen, was that every animal and every human being that dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease. I'm going to repeat that because that's a very profound observation. Every animal and every human being that dies of natural causes dies of a nutritional deficiency disease. And of course, that was poo-pooed by many medical experts back then, because how could anybody die of a nutritional disease in America, right? There's no evidence to support the claim that we can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals. Raise your hand if you ever heard some version of that. No evidence to support the claim you can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals. Doctors say that, experts say that, professors say it, bureaucrats say that, everybody says that. Well, how many of you have ever heard of scurvy? Raise your hand. Sure, you know you can prevent and cure scurvy with vitamin C? How many of you have heard of rickets? Raise your hand. You know you can prevent and cure rickets with vitamin D? How many of you have heard of goiter? Raise your hand. You know you can prevent and cure goiter with iodine and copper and selenium? How many of you have heard of anemia? Raise your hand. Golly gee, you know you can prevent and cure anemia with iron and copper and folic acid and vitamin B12? And what about things like beriberi with congestive heart failure? You know you can prevent and cure that with thiamine or vitamin B1? And what about pellagra with all the emotional stuff and schizophrenia and diarrhea and all the skin diseases that go along with pellagra? You can prevent and cure that with vitamin B3, or niacin. And all the essential nutrients are called essential nutrients because if you don't have enough, you get diseases. If you get the disease, you take the nutrient, it goes away. So any doctor, any expert, any bureaucrat, any professor, anybody who says there's no evidence to support the claim you can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals is a fool. And you don't want to have a fool for a doctor. That's the last person you want to have as a fool as a doctor, right? Well, I was really pleased to see this come out in October of 2002. This was a World Health Organization study. They said that the study finds life expectancy closely mirrors dietary factors. They went on to say nearly one-third of early death and disability stems from nutritional or dietary causes, including too little food in the poorest countries, the wrong kind of food in the richest countries. And then this was perhaps the most profound observation they made. Inadequate intake of 3 key micronutrients, zinc, iron, and vitamin A, is responsible for an unexpectedly high burden of disease. Now, there's 90 essential nutrients. They didn't even look at the other 87. Okay? And so finally, 40 years later, they came to the same conclusion. So I feel pretty good about that. Well, as I said, there's all these essential nutrients. There's 2 reasons why they're called essential nutrients. Number 1, our bodies cannot manufacture them. We must consume them every day, either as food or as supplements. Number 2, if you're missing them, you get some horrible collection of diseases, many of which are life-threatening. That's why they're called essential nutrients. The ones I like to talk about are mineral deficiencies because they make up 2/3 of the essential nutrients. 2/3 of the essential nutrients are minerals, and our foods cannot manufacture them. Our food plants cannot manufacture minerals. Our food plants, our grains, vegetables, fruits, and nuts, can in fact manufacture vitamins and amino acids and fatty acids. We all know that. But if you can find me any plant that will manufacture a mineral, I'll give you $1 million tax-free, small bills in any offshore account you want. Okay, you'll be really, very wealthy if you can find me a plant that will manufacture minerals. There's no such plant. Nutritional minerals do not occur. They do not occur in a uniform blanket around the crust of the earth. Nutritional minerals occur in veins like chocolate and chocolate ripple ice cream. Nutritional minerals occur in veins like gold and silver. And the odds of you getting all essential nutrients and all essential minerals just by eating well is 0. In the same field, for instance, on one farm, in the same field, row number 1 might have 3 essential minerals, row number 5 might have 0, row number 10 might have 8, row number 15 might have 20, row number 20 might have 0, row number 25 may have 0, row number 30 might have 16. And so it depends on which row in the field that your tomato or your corn or your soybeans or your wheat came from, what minerals you're getting. To be happy, plants only need 9 minerals. We need 60. And so if the plant's very happy and you look at it, man, this is a really good-looking carrot. You know it has 9 minerals, but what about the other 51? And it doesn't make sense to throw your life away, or at least part of your longevity or your health, on what may or may not be in the food, because you can't tell by looking at the carrot. As long as it's getting its 9 minerals, it's happy. Okay? Then you start seeing things like this. This is actually from 1995. Healthy crops depend on healthy soil. Well, everybody knows that, need 9 minerals. But the new report says that nearly 40% of the world's land used for agriculture is seriously degraded, which means it doesn't have these nutrients in it anymore. Loss of good soil of cancer. This came out in 1992. And they said that African soils over the last 100 years in 1992 had been depleted in its fertility by 74%, Asia by 73%, Australia by 55%, Europe 72%, the United States, North America 85%, and South America by 76%. I thought this was kind of interesting. This came out in January of 2000, and this was a little report, and I never have taken the time to get the original because this is self-explanatory. Some blame the environment. USDA says better test a factor. Well, I think it's more serious than that. They compared a 22-year period from 1975 to 1997 on certain nutrient values in our food, and they took the 12 most popular vegetables that are grown and eaten in America, including broccoli and cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, collards, daikon, kale, mustard greens, onions, parsley, turnip greens, watercress, etc. They found out that there was a 53% drop in the calcium values. They found out there was a 38% drop in vitamin A, 48% drop in riboflavin B2, 35% less thiamine or B1, and a 29% less niacin or vitamin B3. And again, the reason is, if you're not putting the essential minerals in the soil that the plant needs, slowly, their ability to manufacture vitamins begins to drop. We know that today there's only about 8% protein in our wheat. 1900, there was 23% protein in our wheat. Okay? This is not a mystery that you can prevent and cure diseases with vitamins and minerals. This came out in 1992. Cover article, Time magazine, The Real Power of Vitamins. New research shows they may help fight cancer, heart disease, and the ravages of aging. Now, it was very obvious after writing some 75 scientific articles on these diseases that were caused by deficiencies of vitamins and minerals and trace minerals and amino acids and fatty acids in animals and people. 75 scientific articles were published in medical journals and veterinary journals, pathology journals. Wrote chapters for 8 multi-author textbooks on the subject. Wrote a big textbook of my own, big 1,000-page textbook, trying to educate medical students. Was not very successful at that, and it was very obvious nothing was going to happen. So I went back to school and became a physician. In 1978, began to use these veterinary nutritional formulas in my human patients. And one of the things I wanted to do special for my patients was to get them to live to be an average of 100 instead of 75. So I began to collect information on what it takes to live to be 100 instead of 75. And it's very interesting. A certain percentage of my patients back then, in 1978, would say things like, I don't think I want to live to be 100. And I said, well, why wouldn't you want to live to be 100? Well, I don't want to wind up in a nursing home and be abused. And I thought that was kind of reasonable concern. So I began to collect information on 100-year-olds that would satisfy me that I was doing the right thing to help my patients live to be 100. And this is a sort of evidence you could find. This happens to be from September 2000. This is a cover of this particular issue of Scientific American. It's a great little scientific journal that they use to teach the scientific method to high school kids and college students. And they write it in the 5th grade reading level so college students can understand it. And this particular issue is almost entirely devoted to human longevity. They had articles in there by experts in gerontology and genetics and nutrition. And there was a little summary at the end to tell you what you were supposed to learn in this issue. And they were editorially scratching their head trying to figure out what was going on because they were trying to find out what it was it would take people to live to be 100. And they compared the people who didn't listen to their doctors with the people who did listen to their doctors. They found out that the ones who did not listen to their doctors lived longer than the ones who listened to the doctors. Huh? And something we've known for a long time, right? So scientifically, they observed that, and they found out that the people who live longer salted their food, ate eggs every day, cooked and ate with butter, didn't use margarine. Many of them smoked. Many of them ate white lining behind the barn and were drunk all the time. The only exercise they did when they came home after work was to fall asleep on the floor. They didn't come home, take a shower, and go to the fitness center. And as I said, they ate eggs instead of egg beaters. They used butter instead of margarine. They ate their chicken skin. And they were just flabbergasted. They couldn't figure out why these people doing all the wrong things were living so long. Well, obviously, it's because the people who are getting advice from doctors are getting inappropriate advice. If the advice that doctors were giving was correct, then there should be a lot of people living to be 100 who follow the doctor's advice. So we're going to look at some of that. First thing I wanted to do is get some scientific evidence on what it would take to live to be 100. And I look for an animal model. Being a veterinarian and a pathologist, I look for an animal model first. And I ran into, doing some research, I ran into some stuff that was published in the 1860s, 1863. One was written by William Banting on how to cure corpulence. Corpulence is an old-timey word for obesity. And this was back in 1863. And he talked about a low-carb diet, kind of like the Atkins diet. Maybe it should be the Banting diet, instead of the Atkins diet. And then in 1935, a guy who'd been doing all his research in the 1920s by the name of Clive McKay came out with his landmark article in 1935. And what he did was essentially take 3 groups of rats. Group number 1, he gave the rat pellet of the day, and these rats lived to be an average of 2 years, which is really super. because prior to this rat pellet coming out with all of the nutritional knowledge of the time, people who were using rats and mice and rabbits for research would give them rolled oats and carrots and cabbage and things like that, and they might live to be 11 months after weaning instead of 2 years. So it was really good to have a laboratory animal and a food that you could give them that routinely allowed them to live to be 2. He then took the second group, gave them the same basic pellet as group number 1, but he cut the carbohydrate calories by 30%, kept the vitamins and minerals the same, and they lived to be 50% older, 3 years. Got kind of excited about that. Took group number 3, cut the carbohydrate calories from group number 1 by 60%, kept the vitamins and minerals the same, and they lived twice as long. They lived to be 4 years of age, and they really got excited about cutting this carbohydrate calories thing. But it wasn't just that. When they redid the studies with spiders and beetles and worms and pigeons and all kinds of animals, they found out that it was the density of the vitamins and minerals per remaining carbohydrate calorie. That was the basic reason, because he had always kept the vitamins and minerals the same when he dropped the calories. He didn't just drop the percentage of food, he dropped only the carbohydrate calories, keeping everything else the same. So in group number 3, there was like 3 times more vitamins and minerals per carbohydrate calorie than there was in group number 1. Now that I had an animal model and had some idea what to do, I began to look for a human model, and I ran into a guy by the name of Art Linkletter. How many of you heard of Art Linkletter? Okay, great guy. He was funny. I put he and Jack Benny and Red Skelton and Milton Berle all in the same group. They could tell funny stories without saying dirty words and things, and great family comedians. And Art Linkletter wanted to live to be 100. And he wanted to live to be 100 because he read this book. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning book published in 1933 called Lost Horizon. It was written by James Hilton, and in this book, Lost Horizon, James Hilton coined the term Shangri-La. How many of you heard of Shangri-La? Okay, well, that's where that came from, that book. And Art Linkletter got real excited about living to be 100. Well, the book was actually written about a people called the Hunza. How many of you heard of the Hunzas? Okay, well, the Hunzas come from northeast of Pakistan, and they're a third world country, obviously, and Art Linkletter hired an eye doctor by the name of Alan Bannock, Dr. Alan Bannock. And this eye doctor was kind of an amateur farmer, and Art Linkletter funded him to go there for 6 months during the growing season and find out what their secret was to live to be 100. And it was very obvious from reading the book that Alan Bannock had not read Clive McKay's material on his rats. And he was just making lots of observations, didn't give his opinion what was important, but he was a very good observer. And one of the things he found out, these people were third world country. They had no electricity, no indoor plumbing, no hospitals, no pharmacies, no clinics, no doctors. They just used home remedies like herbs and massage therapy and that sort of thing. And yet they were the healthiest and longest lived people on earth. They came from a little mountain range, a little known mountain range by the name of the Karakoram Mountains, about 800 miles east of the Himalayas. Oftentimes people say they're from the Himalayas, but they're from the Karakoram Mountains. And one of the things Dr. Bannock observed was that they would irrigate with water that was kind of gray and opaque. It had lots of silt in it from the glacier grinding up the mountain rocks. And they would irrigate with this glacial water full of this rock silt, this finely ground up rock silt, about the same particle size as talc. And it contained over 60 minerals. And they would irrigate with this. And as the water percolated down into their fields and their gardens, it left a ½ inch to 1 inch of this gray silt on top of the soil. And before it dried, they would run out with their hoes and rakes, and they would hoe and rake this silt down into the soil before it blew away. Now, these people lived at the 19,500-foot level. Now, at 19,500 feet, you can't grow corn and potatoes and rice. Okay? They could grow wheat and rye and barley, but because of the very short growing season, their yields were very, very tiny. Their only carbohydrate they ate during the day, was a little tortilla, 1 tortilla a day. Little round flatbread. That was it. No other carbohydrate. The majority of their food was goat and lamb and mutton and camel and things like yak and rabbits, and they'd get some wild sheep and goats in the area. They'd eat chickens and eggs. They didn't have fish in those areas. They were too high up for fish. And so they cooked in butter. They used milk and cheese and yogurt. They could store dairy protein as cheese and yogurt. And that was it. They had a little garden. They'd grow a little bit of cabbage and tomatoes. Nothing else. They would also take the wood ashes from their fires, their cooking and heating fires, and put it in their gardens. How many of you ever put wood ashes from a fire into your garden? Yeah. This is a very old European and Asian custom, and somehow somebody learned that by putting the wood ashes from your fires into your gardens, it increases the yields and makes the food taste better and so forth. Well, it turns out the wood ashes are the minerals that are left when you burn away the carbon in the wood. So now I had not only an animal model, but a human model. They had a renewable source of minerals in their food. They were on a low-carbohydrate diet, and to me it seemed it explained why they lived to be a ripe old age and were very productive. I also began to collect birthday announcements and obituaries of people who lived to be 100. I wanted to see really what happened to people when they lived to be 100. So I'll show you a few. Ralph Charles from Somerset, Ohio, about in the middle of the state, back in October of 1999, turned 100, and they had a nice little newspaper article about him and told his story. And the fascinating thing to me about Ralph Charles was that at age 100, he was still piloting charter flights and paying passengers around the central part of the United States. He used his single-engine Aranca aircraft. He didn't have any restrictions on his health papers or his license. Now, to me, he doesn't look like what you would expect a decrepit 100-year-old to look like. To me, he's very vibrant. He looks like he's maybe in his late 70s or early 80s, and he's 100 years old and still piloting. I mean, you can imagine if he had Alzheimer's disease, he'd get up there and he'd say, "Excuse me, ma'am, where are we going?" That'd make you nervous, wouldn't it? But he didn't have those problems, obviously. For you ladies, I'm going to throw in Connie Douglas Reeves. Back in September of 2002, she turned 101. When she turned 101, September 26, 2002, she was inducted into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, and her personal motto was, "Always saddle your own horse." And to me, she looks like one of those feisty little people that wouldn't listen to a doctor. You know, she's got her thumbs in her belt, she's got her shoulders back, her chin's out. You can just imagine a doctor saying to her, "Look, Connie, you're 101 years old now. It's time to give up salt. We got to worry about your blood pressure. It's time to give up eggs and butter. We got to worry about your cholesterol." And she's going to say, "Well, up yours, doc, and I've been eating salt and butter since before you were born and eggs before you were born. I'm not going to give that up." You can just see her. She is not a shrinking violet. For those of you that are a little more genteel, in May of 2001, this fellow here, Harold Stilson from Deerfield Beach, Florida, turned 101, went out and played golf for his birthday, and he hit a 6th hole-in-one at 101. Now, you have to have a strong grip. You have to be able to see 108 yards. You know, you have to have good eye-hand coordination. You have to have a good memory. You can't have Alzheimer's disease. You can imagine getting that golf club up there and saying, "Is this baseball? I mean, what am I doing here?" Right? And so he's color-coordinated. It doesn't get any better than that for 101 years old. I think he looks pretty good for 101. And this fella, Antonio Todd, from Sardinia, the island, formerly island nation west of the mainland of Italy, back in January of 2001, turned 112, and he attributed his longevity to drinking 1 glass of red wine a day. There's a certain amount of validity to that because in the red wine there are these antioxidants that we know reduce your risk of heart disease and cancer. But you can get those same antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, so you don't need to drink the wine necessarily. It doesn't seem to matter what you eat as long as you keep the carbohydrates down and the vitamins and minerals up. That seems to be the thread, the common thread between all 100-year-olds. I'll show you an example. This gal here, Dora Ramathebe from South Africa, was born in 1881, and in 1995 she turned 114. And when she was asked, "Dora, what do you attribute your health and longevity to?" she said, "Oh, I ate locusts, you know, the grasshoppers. You know about grasshoppers here, right? Pumpkin seeds, tortoise meat, wild herbs, dried fruit, and a cup of coffee." You notice it doesn't say bread. You notice it doesn't say potatoes. It doesn't say rice. It doesn't say corn. The only carbohydrate might be a little bit of that dried fruit. She got her protein from the locusts, from the grasshoppers, and the tortoise meat. She got her essential fatty acids from the pumpkin seeds, and if she ate the herbs grain, she got a little bit of vitamin C and folic acid and beta-carotene. And she lived to be 114. She probably lived longer than that. I didn't keep track of her after that birthday announcement. Yeah, crickets won't work. Okay. February 15th, 2003, this gal here, Maddie Owens, 119, died at age 119, and she grew up in South Carolina, and apparently when she was born in 1883, she was still working in the cotton fields. Owens told her family of her hard work in the cotton fields. I guarantee you that she didn't have vaccinations. I guarantee you that she didn't have antibiotics. I guarantee you she didn't have 3 good square meals a day. But I'll bet you, because I spent a lot of time in Africa, 2 years in Africa, and I know what they did with their wood ashes from their cooking fires. They always put it in their gardens, even in Africa, for their cabbage and their tomatoes and beans and so forth. And so I bet that her parents put the wood ashes from their cooking fires into the gardens. And one of my favorite birthday announcements goes back to 1995. This was a birthday announcement for Jean Calment from France. And she was documented by the Guinness World Book of Records being the oldest living woman at the time. There was more than 200 women who claimed to be older than she, but they didn't have the paperwork to prove it. Jean Calment had the paperwork to prove, to the satisfaction of the Guinness World Book of Records, that February 21st, 1995, she was in fact 120. February 21st, 1996, she turned 121. February 21st, 1997, she turned 122. And she died in August of 1997 at age 122 years and 164 days. She died suddenly of a stroke. She was up cooking her eggs and singing Farah Jacques. Farah Jacques, Farah Jacques. Ah! Fell over dead. Didn't have Alzheimer's disease. She was bright and mentally alert until the moment she died. She didn't have cardiovascular disease. She didn't have diabetes. She didn't have cancer. And she did have rheumatoid arthritis in her hands. You can see, but that's pretty good. Lived to be 122 and a half. Die suddenly without being mentally infirm. I mean, that's the way to do it, right? I thought this one was kind of cute. I was in Adelaide, Australia, back in October of 2003 when this came out in an Australian newspaper. World's oldest man dies at 122. A Cambodian tiger hunter by the name of Sek Yi, who is also the martial arts expert, attributed his longevity and that of his wife, I'm assuming a widow now, Long Uk, 108, to smoking and prayer. That's kind of a strange combination. But I'm sure he had got some mineral somewhere. Again, this is an Australian newspaper. It came out in March of 2003. A Brazilian believed to be the world's oldest woman died at age 124. Maria Etelvina dos Santos died of a stroke. Her birth certificate says she was a descendant of African slaves born in July of 1878. You think she got vaccinations and antibiotics? You think she had 3 good square meals a day? No, she was born in a straw hut caulked with cow dung. And probably led a pretty miserable life as she was growing up. But I guarantee you they put their wood ashes from their cooking fires into the gardens. And they didn't have doctors, and they didn't have hospitals and clinics, and they didn't have pharmaceuticals. And yet she lived to be 124. I'll give you 2 more, then I think you'll get the idea, and then we'll move on. But I think these are interesting, and they all tell stories. This next one I identified with because I grew up in a little cattle farm in Missouri. We raised purebred Angus cattle, and we also had a little feeder operation to keep a kind of an even cash flow. And so I identified with this guy. He was a cattle farmer from a little town outside of Kathmandu, Nepal in the Himalayan mountains. And according to his obituary, he never saw a doctor, never set foot in a hospital. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for 120 years. He wasn't a vegetarian. Raising cattle, he ate red meat every day. And in April of 1998, he died at age 141. When he was a young man, he led the first land survey team around Kathmandu in 1888. The last one I want to share with you tells a lot of stories. It's one of my favorite obituaries. It's about an Iranian woman by the name of Mazumi Dusti, and this was published in the Rocky Mountain News Wire Service out of Denver, Colorado in January of 1995. It said, Mazumi Dusti died at age 161. Now, this seems pretty outrageous, but you have to give a lot of credibility to this obituary because she was survived by 6 living children ranging in age from 120 to 128. They hadn't even left home to go to college yet. I thought this was a very profound observation by her oldest son, Golam. Her oldest son said his mother had never visited a doctor, never taken any prescription medications or over-the-counter medications. She only used herbs during her life. Now, do you think she had access to vaccinations when she was a child? Did any of her kids get vaccinated? No, they were born up in a little rock hut up in the mountains of a village, Kalatin Bala, in Khorasan province in Iran. Okay, and I guarantee you she was functional till very close to her death, because they don't have nursing homes, and they're not just going to find some way to give her IVs to keep her alive. They're in that rock hut. And so she had to be still able to snap beans and skin carrots and cook and sing lullabies to great-great-great-great-grandkids. And whatever she did sewed maybe. We all have these genetic capacity to live well beyond 100. Experts in longevity, experts in gerontology and genetics tell us. We all, every one of us, each and every one of us in this room has the ability to live well beyond 100. And the only reason why we don't, the shortest way to say it, is because we do too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the good stuff. That's the most succinct way I can say it. We all have the genetic capability to do it. One of the fascinating things to me is that we ask doctors about what to do for health and longevity. Now, if doctors knew what they were talking about, that would make sense. But I'm a scorecard kind of guy, and so I'm looking at doctors and saying, really, do they really know what they're talking about? When my tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, which came out in 1994, I had a statistic in there from a small survey. It said doctors lived to be 57.6, and I rounded up to 58 to give them the benefit of the doubt, and doctors just went ballistic. Well, Wallach, you got to be lying. We don't live to be 58. We live to be 75 like everybody else. Well, even if they live to be 75 like everybody else, that wouldn't be too good a recommendation, because if they're the holders of all knowledge and health and they follow their own recommendations, they should live to be 85 or 95 or 100 or something. Well, they didn't want to believe me, so they did their own study, and they came out 5 years later in 1999 with the answer to their study, and they found out that doctors in America lived to be 56. So I missed it by 2 years. So why do we ask people how to live a long, healthful life who only live to be 56 on the average? That's because they have convinced us that health care is very, very, not only important, but also very detailed. It's very complicated, and you have to go to school for 14 years to know how to deal with health care. And they've convinced Americans that this is true. I mean, you can't pick up a newspaper or watch TV or listen to the radio without health care and Medicare and Medicaid and all the stuff being on the front, right? Well, let's look at some more scorecards and see if we're getting the bang for our buck. Right now, the entire world each year spends $2.7 trillion for health care, 2.7 trillion with a T. Out of that $2.7 trillion each year that the world spends for health care, the U.S. alone, the U.S. spends $1.6 trillion, more than half. And yet, in April of 1990, we ranked 17th in longevity. There were 16 other countries whose peoples live longer than we did. We didn't even rank in the top 10. You have to ask, well, who is number one, and what did they do different from us? Well, the Japanese were number one. They lived to be 79.1, 4.1 years longer than we did. And the interesting thing was, the Japanese are heavy smokers. 68% of the Japanese smoke 3 to 5 packs of cigarettes a day. They are heavy smokers. They are the smokingest nation on earth. And yet they have 85% less cancer and cardiovascular disease than we do. Japanese consume 12 to 15 grams of salt every day, an entire salt shaker per person. We're supposed to consume approximately 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams a day of salt, and yet they have 85% less cardiovascular disease than we do. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese to end World War II. They've had more radiation per person than any other culture on Earth. Nobody cleaned it up. They've been wallowing in all the radiation in the soil and water and environment ever since we dropped the bombs on them. Nobody cleaned it up. And they have 85% less cancer than we do. And so I want to know what they know. In all this adversity, they're still living longer than us and are healthier than us. You can say, well, maybe that was a bad study. It should be redone. Well, they did 10 years later, June of 2000. They reran the same study, and the Japanese maintained number one. But they dropped from 79.1 down to 74.5. So this was our chance to catch up and surpass them with all this money we're spending. But instead, we dropped from 17th in longevity all the way down to 24th because we went from 75 to 70. There's now 23 other countries whose peoples live longer than we do. Now, you don't have to be a genius to figure out we're not getting the bang for the buck. You don't have to be a genius to say, well, maybe the medications we're getting aren't doing any good. Maybe the advice we're getting is not the best. No matter what the doctors tell us, we're going the wrong direction, so you can't deny these facts, okay? You can't deny the facts. Well, there's 250,000 drugs, pharmaceuticals in the PDR, the Physician's Desk Reference, that they have access to treat people in America. There's new ones coming out all the time. They're always bragging about how many billions of dollars worth of research they spend every year to find new drugs. And if you take out the 500 antibiotics, it still leaves 249,500 drugs. There's not a single one of those designed to cure anything. There's not a single drug in the PDR, except maybe antibiotics might cure a strep throat. Other than that, there's not a single drug in the PDR that cures anything. They're all designed to milk your insurance policies. They're all designed to milk Medicare and Medicaid. They're all designed to milk your wallet, because there's no laws requiring the pharmaceutical companies to manufacture drugs that cure, even though they could, but because there's no laws requiring them to do it, they don't. This just came out in January of this year. Health spending has biggest surge in 11 years. We're going to jump right over here and say, U.E. Reinhardt, a health economist at Princeton, said, the increase in healthcare spending is no surprise. This is what the American people asked for when they abolished managed care. What he said there was this. For about 8 years, the cost of healthcare stayed the same when there was managed care. Doctors didn't like it because managed care kept them from doing unnecessary tests. Managed healthcare kept them from doing unnecessary surgeries and writing prescriptions for unnecessary drugs. And they didn't like it because it cut their income in half. They weren't getting the kickbacks anymore. And so they began to whisper to their patients, there's an economist, there's a bookkeeper making decisions what tests you should have and what drugs you should get and what treatment you should have. It should be my job. I'm a doctor. It should be my job. And after a while, people said, yeah, it should be the doctor's job. Why is some bookkeeper doing that? And so they convinced the American public that managed care was no good, and so people then complained to their legislators, who then voted it out. And, of course, their workplaces went to other things other than managed care. And immediately, when managed care got dumped, healthcare doubled and tripled, and it's just going up like a skyrocket because now there's no controls on the doctors. Well, how does this affect us? This came out in May of 2003. Age 65 plus workforce rose sharply since 1980. Americans are living longer and they're fretting about their financial security. What is the biggest reason why people are worried about their financial security? Healthcare. Healthcare, right? Healthcare is the biggest thing that people worry about. As you get older, you need more healthcare. And there's all kinds of things happening because of healthcare. Doctors always get paid. You're going to pay it. Your employer's going to pay it. The government's going to pay it. They don't worry. They're happy, right? I thought this was really a very interesting editorial. This came out in February of this year, just last month, just about a month ago. Outsourcing the American Dream. How many of you heard of outsourcing? Okay, good. That's half of you. Outsourcing means that they're sending American jobs to other countries. I'll give you an example. These big corporations are training Indian people in New Delhi how to speak with a Texas accent. So when you call up, you see something on TV you want to order, or in a catalog it says call this toll-free number, or you want to make an appointment for an appliance repairman to come out of your house and put a new motor in your dryer or something. When you call up, they say, howdy, ma'am, how y'all doing? Because they've taught these guys in Pakistan and India how to speak with a Texas accent. How can we hip you? It only rings 3 times, and they pick it up in New Delhi, India, and they take this order. Well, what they said was this. By the time 2006 comes, between 35 and 45% of current full-time IT jobs, which are these information technology jobs, will be sent overseas. This amounts to 14 million jobs. 14 million jobs in the next year and a half are going overseas, and here's why. While telephone operators in the United States earn an average of $12.50 an hour plus their health care benefits, in India, they earn less than $1 and no health care benefits. And because of NAFTA, how many heard of NAFTA? The NAFTA agreement with all these countries gave our government permission to give corporations tax benefits to send the jobs out of the country. We give tax benefits to companies to send jobs out of the country. Now, how absurd is that? That is really absurd. It's absolutely criminal, right? It says payroll clerks in Asian nation take home less than $2 an hour and no health benefits, and their counterparts in this country averages $15.17 an hour with health benefits. So as health benefits climb and companies don't want to pay them anymore, they start outsourcing the jobs to countries that don't have health benefits. And what happens to the people who are here left in the United States? Well, they still have to pay for their health care. This came out in June of 2003. Study finds doctors skip key steps of treatments. Doctors fail to take about half the recommended steps for treating common illnesses, such as high blood pressure and diabetes, suggesting that health care in the United States isn't nearly as good as many people thought. Well, that's not a new belief, right? This came out in October of 1999. Doctors say they'd lie to get insurers to pay. This is a study done in 8 cities, 169 internists, and they presented this to the annual meeting of the American Medical Association conference, annual conference in Los Angeles in October of 1999. And I'm just going to go over 2 of them. This was actually quite a thick report. I'll go over 2 of them. It said 58% supported lying so a severely ill 55-year-old could get a coronary bypass, even though her pains were not becoming more frequent as the insurer required during the managed care days. Now, if your pains are not becoming more frequent and the degree of pain remains the same, this is called stable angina. And how many of you have heard of nitroglycerin? Yeah, for 30, 50 cents treatment, you can put a nitro tab under your tablet. It may cost you $6 to $10 a month to deal with the pain. And as long as the frequency is the same, the pain level is the same, you can do that forever. And also, how many of you heard of Dean Ornish? Well, Dean Ornish was an MD, PhD from Harvard Medical School. He did a great double-blind study where he took hundreds of people with 85%, 90% blockage of their 3 main coronary arteries, and he put them on a restricted diet, gave them some supplements, gave them low-impact exercise like yoga and swimming, and in 6 months' time, all their arteries were open 100% without surgery. This was impossible, according to surgeons. The only way to deal with blocked arteries in the heart is to do a bypass, right? There's no way you can do that with diet and exercise and supplements. And so they made him do it again. Another double-blind study worked, results exactly the same. Well, what a doctor should say today when somebody comes to them with angina, stable angina, say, look, let's get on a Dean Ornish program. It's actually going to cut your food bill in half. Save a little money here. We're going to get you on a little nutritional program, supplement program, do some yoga. You can do that for free at home. Well, here's a $10 tape. You can learn how to do these yoga exercises. You come back in 6 months, and if you're improved, we'll just keep doing the same thing. If it gets worse, then we'll consider the surgery. But there's no doctors who do that. Doctors kind of lie a little bit, but they want you, well, worse than that, they want God to believe that they're lying on behalf of Mabel or Ruth or Roy. He says, Lord, you know I'm lying, but it's not because of me. I'm lying because the mean old managed care insurance companies won't let Roy have a triple bypass. And Roy needs a triple bypass, so forgive me, Lord, because I have to lie for Roy. Now, why is that doctor lying? Is he lying for Roy's behalf? No, he's lying for his own behalf. He wants the $85,000. Keep that cash flow going. The other one I want to talk about briefly is a 1997 study by the Health Insurance Association of America found that 75% of insurance fraud is committed by providers, which is their code word for doctors. 75% of health insurance fraud is committed by doctors who apply for payment, which they get, for procedures they didn't even do. They apply for payment for procedures they give you that you didn't need. They're the only profession or trade in America or the world where they don't have to go to a bank when they need extra money. They just send in a couple of claims to the insurance company pays them. There's not a single doctor ever goes to jail for that. Insurance companies write that off as the cost of doing business. Now, who pays for that? Each and every one of us as these premiums go up, as more and more doctors are doing these things. And they look at it as, hey, it's our money, we're going to get it anyway we have to. This came out in September of 1997. It was an article published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Young doctors lack stethoscope skills, which is, the primary instrument of a doctor. Many new doctors steeped in high-tech medicine can't properly use a stethoscope. What they learned was they could just identify 20%. They could just identify 20% of heart problems that were presented to them. They could not identify 80%. How can you go to school for 14 years and not use a stethoscope? It's like an apprentice carpenter apprenticing for 7 years. How can you not learn how to use a hammer, right? Well, the reason why doctors don't spend any time learning how to use a stethoscope is because if they were to use a stethoscope to diagnose cardiovascular problems, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you can identify all cardiovascular problems with a stethoscope. It takes you an extra 10 minutes to listen to every square millimeter of the heart and the valves and the arteries and things, but you can do it. Gain the skills to do it, but then you make an extra $30 for a long office visit. But if they send you in for an angiogram or a CAT scan or an MRI or an ultrasound, guess what? They make $421 every time they send somebody in for those procedures. What's better, $421 or $30? Okay. You're beginning to get a picture develop here. Now this happens 3,000 times a year in America. Mildred C. Clark, 86 years old, was found cold, stiff, and blue on her apartment floor. And the apartment manager got scared because he thought she was dead, so he called the paramedics, and they examined her. Yeah, she's dead. And so they called the coroner. He came out. Yeah, she's dead. So they put her in a body bag and shipped her to the Albany, New York Medical Center, which was associated with a medical school there in upstate New York. And so they sent an intern down to do the final exam before they wrote a death certificate on her, because you can't do an autopsy on somebody until they've had a death certificate. So he examines her, and he probably just closed his eye. He'd probably never seen a dead body by himself, right? So everybody else says she's dead, so he writes this death certificate. They take her down to the morgue, and they strip her naked, take a pressure hose, blow all her makeup and gunk off her body, put her wet, naked body into the body bag, and they put her in a freezer for 90 minutes until the medical examiner and the pathologist get there to do the autopsy. 90 minutes after being in the freezer, they wheel her out and zip open the body bag, and Mildred C. Clark, 86 years old, sits up. She says, "Thank God you found me. It was cold and dark in there, and I didn't know where I was." I mean, after 14 years of medical school, doctors can't even tell if you're alive or dead. That makes me nervous. And then according to Ralph Nader in January of 1993, big study, according to Ralph Nader, doctors kill each year in America 300,000 patients in hospitals alone each year as a result of medical negligence. 300,000 are killed each year in hospitals alone as a result of medical negligence. Each year in America, 1.3 million Americans are injured in hospitals as a result of medical negligence. Each year in America, 2 million are infected in hospitals alone as a result of medical negligence. And despite heroic round-the-clock nursing care and intravenous antibiotics, 90,000 to 100,000 of these 2 million each year die. In hospitals each year, 2.2 million people get what's called adverse drug reactions to the drugs that they are introduced to in the hospital. And despite heroic measures, 140,000 to 200,000 die every year. You add these up, ladies and gentlemen, that's 3.5 million to 4 million casualties killed, injured, and infected each year in hospitals by doctors each year. 3.5 million to 4 million killed, injured, and infected each year in hospitals by doctors. It's estimated to be double that outside of hospitals. Now, we're not talking about 3 people a year here. We're talking about a huge number of people. So, why do we go to doctors for health and longevity information? In 1999, doctors were believed to be the 8th top killer of Americans. Medical mistakes are the 8th top killer of Americans, behind cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, gastrointestinal problems, liver problems, kidney problems, and doctors. Today, this is just out. I haven't had time to make a slide, but trust me, right now, doctors each year in America kill just short of 800,000 people. They're now listed as the #1 cause of death in Americans. Number 2 is cardiovascular disease. Number 3 is cancer. Number 1 are doctor kills. Okay? Now, how do we deal with this? You know, even Thomas Jefferson said that a little revolution once in a while is a good thing. It's time to revolt against the American healthcare system. They do everything in their favor, nothing in the favor of the patients. It's a miracle. It's a God-given miracle if you survive a hospital visit, truly, without being damaged or infected or killed. And so, how do we deal with this? Well, we've learned in other instances how to deal with these kind of problems when the industry is abusing us. For instance, 60 years ago, when the automobile industry began to abuse customers, you know, you go in for a $6 oil change 60 years ago, and you go to pick up your car. They say, well, it's $300. You say, why? That's my month's wages. What do you mean, $300? Well, you told us to do whatever was necessary, and so we rebuilt your transmission, we rebuilt your carburetor, we gave you all new tires, we rotated them, we put in new brake shoes, new spark plugs, we gapped them, we did your timing, $300. And you kicked the counter and yelled and screamed, but in the end, you paid your $300. Well, people got tired of that, and so they started going to flea markets and junkyards and garage sales looking for parts for their car. And after a while, the demand for these parts and tools at garage sales and flea markets and junkyards became so great, these sources couldn't handle the demand anymore, so a whole industry popped up. How many of you have heard of Napa Auto Parts and Pep Boys and AutoZone and Schutz? And because now you can walk in, you can get any part you want, you can get any tool you want for working on your own car. This has turned out to be a huge industry. And that's because the automobile industry got greedy some 60 years ago, and now more and more people do it themselves. And the same thing happened in the construction industry. When it got to the point where they were charging a little couple $60 to change the float in the toilet and $200 to change the light bulb, and little couples would sign a contract for a $6,000 roof, but they didn't point out to them that there's a rotating interest thing, a revolving interest thing, and if you didn't pay it in a year, it cost you $100,000. And all these horror stories came out, so people began to go to junkyards and garage sales and flea markets looking for materials and tools to maintain and repair their own homes. How many remember back in the 50s and 60s when everybody had a table saw and a band saw and routers and all these tools, and you turned your garage into a shop and everybody began to do things themselves? Well, soon these sources couldn't supply the demand anymore, so a whole industry developed to supply the demand for people who want to maintain and repair their own homes. They're called Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards. And if you don't know how to put shingles on your own roof, they'll give you a free class. Okay? Well, it's long overdue that we rebel in the same way against the healthcare industry. We need to do more and more ourselves. With a little bit of education, 15 minutes of reading a night, listening to tapes or CDs in your drive around your car. In any particular instance, with 15 minutes of reading, you can do whatever a doctor does. It's that simple. For instance, a doctor has less than $100 worth of stuff in his examining room. He's got a blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, he's got a thermometer, a little rubber mallet to see if you have reflexes. Well, if you walk in the examining room, I know you got reflexes. Now, if they carry in, I might want to test them, but if you walk in on your own, you're singing and dancing, I don't have to worry about that too much. They have a little AAA battery pen light, they look in your eyes and down your throat with, and that was given to them by some salesman for a pharmaceutical company. You can jerk it out of their pocket and look at it, and you'll say, oh, look at that, Pfizer. Okay? So they have less than $100 worth of stuff. You can go to a pharmacy or a grocery store and buy all that stuff yourself without a prescription. With the exception of ultrasound and radiation and CAT scans and MRIs, you can get just about any test that a doctor would send you to a lab or a hospital for. For instance, you can go and you can buy a little bottle of test strips to find out what your blood sugar and blood cholesterol is. You can get little test strips to find out if you have blood or sugar in your urine. You can get test strips to find out if you have blood in your bowel movement to do a screen for colon cancer and ulcerative colitis and maybe gastric ulcers. You can find out if you're pregnant or not. For $19.95, you can get a little test strip, you pee on it, and you find out if you're pregnant or not. 30 seconds, honey, I'm pregnant, kind of thing, right? 30 seconds, $19.95. You don't have to go get a physical exam, get a blood test, they charge you $150, and then you got to come back in 3 days for another $150 visit, so it winds up being like $500 to find out if you're pregnant or not. You can do it for $19.95. The one that I really find disgusting are the fertility clinics. You have to pay $25,000 up front before they even talk to you, because they might slip and give you a little information. So before the doctor will see you, you got to pay your $25,000, and then they'll start talking to you about what they can do to help you in a situation of infertility. Well, they want you to believe that they are the holders of all knowledge in this. Well, back when I was a kid, my dad only, 60 years ago, my dad only had a 4th grade education, and he knew how to artificially inseminate cattle back then. It was not a new thing. We've been doing it livestock for 75 years. Maybe longer than that in research, but out in the field practicing, any farmer could do AI or artificial insemination themselves. And, with a $2.95 basting syringe and a condom to collect semen, you can do it yourself for less than $5. So when a doctor starts telling you how technical this stuff is, you can just sort of smile at him and say, okay, doc, let's move forward here. Now, how many of you ever heard of cholesterol? Raise your hand. If you didn't raise your hand, I think you're asleep. Okay. Each year in America, we spend over $100 billion for cholesterol testing, not treatment. Just cholesterol testing, we spend over $100 billion a year. It's a huge industry just for cholesterol testing. That's why, doctors made everybody in America paranoid. How many of you had anybody in your family live in their 80s or 90s? Raise your hand. Sure, I think most people in America have had somebody in their family live to be 80, 90. I guarantee you they ate eggs, they cooked in butter, they didn't have margarine back then. They salted their food. These people smoked. They ate red meat instead of tofu. They ate eggs instead of egg beaters. They didn't exercise, and yet they lived to be 80, 90. Many of them went on to live to be 100. And following their advice, we're going backwards. spending $100 billion a year for cholesterol levels and eating the way doctors have told us. Most people revere their doctors. We've gone from 17th in the world in longevity to 24th. So it doesn't seem like all that's doing much good. Well, if any of you can find me a disease, if anybody in this room can find me any disease that is caused by elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides, I'll give you $1 million, small bills, and any offshore account you want tax-free. There's not a single disease caused by elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides. When you have elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides, I kind of look for other things. You might have a deficiency of niacin, vitamin B3. You have deficiencies of chromium and vanadium, 2 trace minerals. You might have deficiencies of the essential fatty acids, or a ratio problem between omega-3 and omega-6s. You could have early goiter, or hypothyroidism will cause an elevation in your blood triglycerides and blood cholesterol. You could have early diabetes. You can have early diabetes. Even before your blood sugar goes up, your blood cholesterol and triglycerides go up when you have diabetes. Don't take my word for it. Go to the library and look in a medical book on diagnoses. What's the first blood changes that occur when you have diabetes? Elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides. What's the first blood changes when you have low thyroid? Elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides. Do the elevated blood cholesterol and triglycerides cause any disease? No. They're just signals. They're just signals to look somewhere. Do they cause cardiovascular disease? No. Have nothing to do with cardiovascular disease. Nothing. Well, why do doctors get so excited about lowering your cholesterol and lowering your blood triglycerides? Because they get a kickback every time they write a prescription for statin drugs. Lipitor, Loped, and Lipitor. Why would you take a drug that doesn't really do anything, doesn't prevent diseases, lowers your cholesterol, that's what they do, but it causes liver cirrhosis and blindness. That's why you got to go in every couple of months to get your blood taken to see how your liver's doing. They got to look in your eye to make sure you're not going blind yet. Why would you take a drug that gives you liver cirrhosis and makes you go blind when it doesn't do anything? How many of you ever heard of free radicals? Good. How many have heard of trans fatty acids? Yeah, these are common words today. Everybody in the street, even little 6-year-old kids know about these things. And yet, doctors continue to recommend to consume free radicals and trans fatty acids. If I were to come out with a product, Dr. Wallach's 100% pure free radicals, the finest trans fatty acids in the world, and I'd label and put them in a health food store, how many people would buy them? 0. Yeah, I wouldn't sell any of them. And yet, everybody listens to the doctors when the doctors say, I want you to use margarine instead of butter. Margarine is nothing more than a big block of trans fatty acids and free radicals. It is pure 100% trans fatty acids and free radicals. They've killed more Americans with margarine in America than all the wars put together in the 200 plus years we've been in the country, both domestic and foreign. And so if you have any margarine at home tonight, I want you to go home and box it up and ship it UPS to Castro. Put a little note in there that says, my cardiologist says this is good for your heart, and I, in a show of good faith, I'm sending you some margarine. And hopefully he'll be stupid enough to use it. I like to have my patients eat 6 to 10 eggs a day. The more eggs you eat, the lower your cholesterol goes. The more eggs you eat, the lower your cholesterol goes. And I personally eat 6 eggs a day, so I hope you do too. They're great protein, and if you don't fry them, don't cook them in margarine. You want to poach them, soft boil them, hard boil them, soft scramble them in butter at low temperature. This came out in 1995. This little study was presented at the annual meeting of the American Heart Association in Anaheim, California. They said 2 eggs a day won't hurt. And when that report came out in 1995, that sent a shockwave through the entire medical system. Because prior to that report coming out, eggs were the father of the devil. I mean, if you ate eggs, you were doomed. Nobody would hang around you. He's an egg eater, I really like this one. Makes my 10 look pretty conservative. This came out 13 years ago. New England Journal of Medicine, very respectable medical journal. Normal cholesterol in an 88-year-old man who eats 25 eggs a day. Now, you have to ask yourself, why was this old dude eating 25 eggs a day? Maybe he didn't have any teeth and couldn't eat steaks anymore. Maybe he owned an egg farm and liked to do his own quality control. But I think it was more scientific than that. If you appreciate that 95% of male sex hormone, testosterone, 95% of female sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, 95% of the weight of our adrenal hormones, our adrenaline, comes from a master steroid in our body. It's made from a master steroid in our body called cholesterol. You can only make 10%. The other 90% must come from your diet. And when your adrenal glands are exhausted, what's the most likely thing that you're not consuming enough of? Cholesterol. When you're sitting there watching TV, guys, when your wife's saying, hey, look at my nice nightgown. Would you rather watch TV or watch me? And she's got you on an egg-free, butter-free, chicken skin-free, red meat-free diet. Yeah. Have you ever wondered why there's no flourishing colonies of vague ants? All sit around and hum. How many of you heard of Alzheimer's disease? It's a physician-caused disease. Mark my words, in the next 2 years, maybe even next week, it'll pop up in the newspaper. There's more than enough information to prove that it's a physician-caused disease. Alzheimer's disease is a disease that did not occur, even by another name, 40 years ago. It only became recognized as a disease in 1979, 25 years ago. Today, it's the number 4 killer of adults over the age of 65, behind, well, I have to throw in doctors now. Doctors, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease. Now, our brains are made up of 75% a fatty insulation material called myelin. How many of you heard of myelin? Good. Well, myelin is this fatty insulation material in the brain. How many of you are eating a brain sandwich, brain and egg sandwich? Oh, you haven't lived until you eat a brain sandwich. It is good. A little bit of onion and mustard. I mean, there's nothing better than a brain sandwich. It's real cheap now because everybody's afraid of, mad cow disease, so I buy more brains and I eat it. But at any rate, this myelin makes up 75% of our brain weight. It's so important to the animal and human brain. Myelin is 75% of our brain weight. And myelin is 100% cholesterol. You can only make 10% of your daily need. The other 90% must come from your food. And if you're very, very good at listening to your doctor's instructions, does that sound familiar? September 2000, Scientific American. If you listen to your doctor and you give up eggs and eat egg beaters, if you give up butter and eat margarine, if you rip the chicken skin off your chicken before you eat it, you eat tofu instead of red meat, the odds are you're going to get what? Alzheimer's disease. This came out 4 years ago, March of 2000. Alzheimer's tidal wave is feared. It's coming. They said within the next 25 years, 14 million Americans are going to die of Alzheimer's disease. Today, 25 years backwards, only 250,000 died of it. And 25 years backwards from that, nobody died from Alzheimer's disease. Now, why would you go from 0 to 250,000 to 14 million? Well, that's because the baby boomers are coming along, and they listened to the doctors. They believed in technology, and they believed in doctors, and they believed if they followed the doctor's advice, they could be healthier and live to be 100. And so now baby boomers are the ones that get a higher rate and higher percentage of Alzheimer's disease than our older relatives who could care less. Okay? Remember Ralph Charles still flying airplanes at 100? Harold Stilson still hitting in golf hole-in-one at 101? Mazumi Dusti, 161? Still babysitting and singing lullabies and maybe cooking and sewing? We eliminated Alzheimer's disease in animals 65 years ago. This is a human study that came out in July of 1992. Vitamin E can ease memory loss in Alzheimer's patients. This was a study by the University of California, San Diego Medical School and the Salk Institute, infamous for the Salk polio vaccine. They said that vitamin E could bring back a certain amount of memory and make people functional again. Well, nobody could believe that was true, so they redid the study, and 5 years later they came out with this. Vitamin E might slow Alzheimer's disease. High doses of common vitamin E can slow the devastating decline for some Alzheimer's patients, significantly delaying the need for nursing home care. Again, the University of California, San Diego, University Medical School. Now, if you can delay the need for nursing home care for a spouse or a child or a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle who has Alzheimer's disease by 5 years, would that be emotionally and financially beneficial to a family? Of course it would. Why don't doctors tell you this? Well, because they own the stock of the nursing home in your town that takes care of Alzheimer's patients. They don't want this to get out. This came out in 2003, November 2003, a study by Tufts University Medical School in Boston. They found out you could reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease by 48% by just taking either supplements or fish 3 times a day to get the omega-3 essential fatty acids. This has been repeated over and over and over. This just came out January 2004. People taking vitamin C and E were 78% less likely to have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Now, they didn't even think about the diet, getting rid of fried foods and margarines and sources of free radicals. They didn't even think about eating cholesterol. This was just some antioxidants. And so we know from animal studies and these sort of early studies in human beings that if you eat enough cholesterol, not fried, not cooked in margarine, but poached and soft-boiled and hard-boiled and soft scrambled in butter and meat medium rare and so forth, which we'll talk about in a minute, and take in antioxidants, the odds of you getting Alzheimer's disease are reduced to almost zero. I have to go ask my doctor. Well, he's only lived to be 56. Why would you ask him? Now, how many of you have heard of high blood pressure? Raise your hand. Sure, everybody knows about high blood pressure, a very common disease. How many of you have heard of a veterinarian telling you need to give your dog a calcium channel blocker or a beta blocker for high blood pressure? Not very often. How about your goldfish? What about your parakeet and guinea pigs? You know, every animal can get high blood pressure just like people. The reason why they don't is in these little pellets we talked about earlier, we put things in there so they don't get it. They can get it, but they don't get it because we put the stuff in the pellets so they don't get it. How many of you heard that salt is bad for you when it comes to blood pressure? Salt's going to initiate high blood pressure. How many of you have heard that genetics has something to do with it? Well, both of those are wrong. Salt has nothing to do with high blood pressure, and genetics has nothing to do with high blood pressure. It's a simple deficiency of a single nutrient. A single deficiency of a single nutrient. We've eliminated high blood pressure in all these animals. What's the first thing a good farmer puts out for his livestock in the pasture? Salt blocker, salt lick, isn't it? And there's nobody out in the pasture telling a cow she's limited to 1 lick a day, is there? And I refuse to believe that my human patients are dumber than a cow or a sheep. Say, look, go ahead and salt your food to taste. Don't worry about it. If you put too much salt on there, it won't taste good. You won't eat it. Remember the Japanese. They consume an entire salt shaker per person a day, 15 grams of salt a day, and they have 85% less cardiovascular disease than we do. And high blood pressure is not even in their vocabulary because they don't get it very often. Well, this came out in July of 1997. It redeemed my view on salt. It says, doctors lack proof that too much salt is unhealthful. After years of telling healthy people that too much salt isn't good for them, researchers still don't have solid evidence to back up that claim. Now, what do doctors call people who give unsubstantiated health and medical advice for profit? Call them quacks, don't they? So next time you have a doctor who says, look, I need you to give up salt because you're getting to that age, we've got to worry about your blood pressure. You say, doc, you're a quack. There's no evidence to support that claim. Yeah, I know you want to give me those statin drugs and blood pressure medication even though I don't have those problems. And you need to go back and kind of read your stuff here because that's not true. Well, there was a wonderful study done by the U.S. government called the Sodium Task Force. Once and for all, they were trying to prove that salt was the cause of high blood pressure. This was published in April of 1997, and this is the bottom line of the study. It was called the Sodium Task Force, 1997. You can look it up on the internet. The study found that people who limited their salt intake to 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram a day, like doctors want you to do, have 6 times more heart attacks, 600% more heart attacks than those who defied their doctors and ate double that amount. If you listen to your doctor, you had 6 times more heart attacks than people who defied their doctors and ate double that amount. So what mineral are we talking about? What mineral are we talking about when it comes to high blood pressure? It turns out it's a deficiency of calcium. Now, you can drink 50 gallons of milk a day and you can't get enough calcium to get your blood pressure down. You can eat 25 pounds of cheese a day and the only thing that will happen is you'll be so constipated you'll need a jackhammer to have a bowel movement. If you didn't have hemorrhoids, you're going to get them. You can take all the Tums you want. You can take all the oyster shell, eggshell, limestone, coral calcium you want. Nothing's going to happen. That's because if you take 1,000 milligrams of limestone or calcium carbonate, which is coral calcium and eggshell and oyster shell, all those are the same chemical formula. You take a 1,000 milligram capsule, you're not getting 1,000 milligrams of calcium. Only 140 milligrams is elemental calcium. 860 milligrams is carbonate. And because it's an elemental form of calcium, You only get 10%, so 10% of 140 milligrams is 14. If you take 2 of those 1,000 milligram capsules of calcium carbonate in any way, shape, or form, you get 28 milligrams of calcium. It's not going to do you much good when it comes to arthritis, osteoporosis, high blood pressure, periodontal disease, etc., etc. But we've eliminated a lot of high blood pressure in animals and some very famous people who didn't want to use drugs. How many of you have heard of menopause? Raise your hand. Say, now even the guys are raising their hand. Oh, I know about that one. Well, up until about 1958, every doctor used to make 50 cents on dispensing a little herbal formula called Lydia Pinkham's. How many of you heard of Lydia Pinkham's? Yeah. Lydia Pinkham's, very famous herbal formula, and would get rid of the hot flashes, the night sweats. But doctors only made 50 cents when they dispensed a bottle. In 1958, pharmaceutical companies came out with HRT, hormone replacement therapy. And all the research was done by veterinarians, and they were told not to give it to humans because it did terrible things to the laboratory animals. They said, well, that may be true in laboratory animals, but it hasn't been proven in humans yet. We're going to have to kill a lot of women with this stuff before we get too excited about taking it off the market. And so they began to encourage women to take HRT in 1958. It turns out that HRT, estrogen and progesterone combinations, Premarin and drugs like this, increase the risk of breast and uterine and ovarian cancer by 78%. Increase the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease by 200%. Increase the risk of cardiovascular disease by 200%. And a new study that just came out a couple of days ago, and again, I don't have a slide for it yet, and I apologize, increases your risk of asthma by 100%, increases your risk of gradual deafness as you get older by 30%. Why would anybody want to take HRT? Well, Dr. Wallach, you got to get rid of the hot flashes some way. I said, well, why would you risk all these terrible things just to get rid of hot flashes, night sweats? See, you're just a man. You have no idea. I mean, women used to beat me up all the time in my practice. I say, well, it's not worth it. And so we went back to the old Lydia Pinkham's formulas. And guess what? Worked like a charm. There's 29 major studies which shows that it gets rid of the hot flashes and night sweats. Then you throw in the liquid calcium, and guess what? 1,200 milligrams per serving. You deal with the concerns about osteoporosis. You don't have to have all the risk from the HRT. You don't have to have all the risk from HRT. This came out actually in 2000, and they said, and they predicted that the report on carcinogens or cancer-causing chemicals, which was going to come out in January of 2002, is going to list estrogen as a cancer-causing chemical. Well, guess what? That report comes out every year. And guess what's at the top of the list of cancer-causing chemicals? Estrogen. What makes it most dangerous is doctors prescribe it. Doctors prescribe it. Obesity. 40% of Americans are overweight now. They're obese, 30 pounds overweight over their ideal weight for their body type and height and so forth. 40% of Americans are obese. This is relatively new. 50 years ago, it was like 15%, and 100 years ago, there was very rarely, less than 1% of Americans were obese. And it turns out it's caused by a simple, single problem. I can walk on a horse farm, and I can tell you in 30 seconds if the horses on that farm are getting all the minerals they need. This is a little working wagon in an Amish farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And I walked on that place, and I knew immediately that the horses weren't getting all the minerals they needed because the horses were eating, nibbling all along this buckboard rail, and then they just ate this one particular place. Why did they eat that one particular place? Because that's where the farmer put his hand when he jumped out of the wagon every time. His hot, sweaty hand full of what? Salt. Okay? Now, my daddy had a fourth-grade education, and he knew every time he'd see our cattle chewing on the fence and eating dirt and chewing on the feed box instead of eating the feed, they were minerally deficient. He'd give them minerals, and they'd go away. And we usually learned painfully when we were a kid that it's not socially acceptable to chew on the furniture and eat dirt. Bam! Don't do that anymore. That chair costs a lot of money. Ooh, okay. If you're that hungry, go into the kitchen and have a piece of pie and ice cream, or eat a Twinkie, or have a RC and a moon pie. And so people began to recognize these cravings, which we call pica and cribbing in animals and munchies in people. The munchies in people are pica and cribbing in animals. Pica and cribbing in animals are the munchies in people. And so we've been taught that these cravings and the munchies are due to a Twinkie deficiency. Now, if we were taught as kids that this is caused by a mineral deficiency, we'd all take minerals that have 0 calories in them. Americans would all be slim. Weight problems are nothing more than a mineral deficiency disease. Now, nobody knows more about weight gain, weight loss than veterinarians. Why is that? When you put an animal into the feedlot, what are they supposed to do? Lose weight or gain weight? Gain weight. So we know the technology. And snack food companies know this. They spend a lot of money on research learning the technology of weight gain. And they fix their little snacks to make sure that you just can't eat one. In fact, one of them, Lay's potato chips, even uses that as their motto on their bag. You just can't eat one. And so they fix it so you're minerally deficient if you eat their stuff. Okay? But if you take your minerals, the cravings go away. And that alone, you can lose 10, 15, 20 pounds just because you're not desiring to eat things between meals. You're not going to sit there and watch TV and fill your face all night because you don't have those cravings anymore. That's not a problem with your self-respect. It's not a problem. You don't have a deficiency of hypnosis. You don't have a deficiency of acupuncture. You don't have a deficiency of ephedra. You have deficiencies of minerals. You take your mineral program, need a couple of meal replacers a day, give up some carbohydrates, which you learn from Clive McKay and William Banting and so forth, and Bob Atkins. You give up carbohydrates in your bread and your pastas and your rice and your potatoes, and you're going to lose weight and keep it off. It won't come back as long as you stay on that program. But as soon as you go off your minerals, the cravings start up again because it's a mineral deficiency. You'll always get rid of the cravings within 10 to 14 days. Now I want to talk briefly about 3 serious ones. We're first going to talk about cancer. It's some of the more serious diseases. This came out in 1997. We had spent $30 billion on a war on cancer. This bill was signed by Nixon when he was in office. And despite 26 years of spending this $30 billion, researchers suggest putting emphasis on prevention. Now, you give me $30 billion, 1 year's time, I'll find you a cure. And why couldn't they find a cure for $30 billion? I mean, we only took $100 million to fly a man to the moon, put him on the moon's surface, pick him up, and bring him back. $100 million to do that. $30 billion, they looked for a cure, but they didn't think outside the box. They weren't really looking for a cure. They spent all their time looking for a better chemotherapy with your tax money, because that's where the money is. Well, during that time, every 5 years or so, they doubled the amount of money for research. The death rate remained the same. So they weren't looking in the right place, obviously, or really looking that hard. I know your doctors didn't tell you about this one. This one came out in October of 1998. There was a Harvard Nurses Health Study. It had 90,000 nurses, 20 years of data, and they could only use 15 years of the 20 years of data in the study for these 90,000 nurses because for the first 5 years there were not enough nurses using multiple vitamins. And what they found out was these 90,000 nurses who take multiple vitamins for at least 15 years can cut the risk of colon cancer by 75%. Are there any drugs that will do that? Is there a drug in the market that will cut your risk of colon cancer by 75%? No. How come your doctors didn't email you, call you up, call you, bring you in and say, look, here's something really remarkable. Just by taking one multivitamin every day, you can reduce your risk of colon cancer by 75%. Yahoo! Did they do that? No. I bet not a single one of you got any direct communication from your medical doctor telling you this. They read it in their journals, a Harvard Nurses Health Study. Whether you believe it or not, how many of you have heard that a low-fat diet will reduce your risk of colon cancer and breast cancer and all kinds of cancers? How many of you heard that? Whether you believe it or not. Yeah. This is one of the American Cancer Society, doctors, the American Medical Association. Everybody says low-fat diets will reduce your risk of cancer. High-fat diets increase your risk of cancer. Harvard Nurses Health Study, 90,000 nurses, 20 years of data. They compared the rate of cancer in these 90,000 nurses, comparing those that had more than 50% of their calories as fat, which is a very, very high-fat diet, compared to those that had less than 20% of their calories as fat, which is a very low-fat diet. And if fat content of your diet had anything to do with the rate of cancer, the ones having more than 50% of their calories as fat should have a lot more cancer than the ones having less than 20%. I mean, that's real simple stuff, right? Well, this came out in March of 1999. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Again, they compared the the rate of cancer in these 90,000 nurses, comparing those that had less than 20% of their calories as fat versus those that had more than 50% of their calories as fat. They found no measurable difference. The amount of fat you eat in your diet has nothing to do with the rate of cancer. The amount of fat you eat in your diet has nothing to do with the rate of cancer. Nothing. It turns out the amount of fat in your diet has nothing to do with the rate of cancer. It's how you cook the fat. It's how you cook the fat. Not the amount of fat, it's how you cook the fat. This study came out in 1998, University of South Carolina. Big study. Study links very well done meat to breast cancer, and then later on to prostate cancer and colon cancer. Among women who preferred all their meat very well done with a doneness score of 9, where the fat was burnt, and it tastes very good, believe me, burnt fat tastes very good. I used to eat it when I was a kid. There was a 462% greater chance of having breast cancer than for women who ate their meat rare or medium. Not a 5% increase in risk. Not a 50%, not a 100%, not a 200%, not a 300%, not a 400%, but a 462% increase in risk of getting breast cancer, colon cancer, and prostate cancer if you eat your meat cooked well done and eat burnt animal fat. Now, after tonight, you can't claim you were not informed. If you go home, you continue to eat burnt animal fat, whether it's in hot dog skins over the fire, you know, or you're grilling chicken skin and eating it that way, or you're grilling your hamburgers burnt. You know, I get people, I cringe. People, I want my hamburger burnt. I don't want to see anything pink in there. I want it burnt. I want like charcoal. They're doomed. Even God can't help them. You know, when you're that stupid, God can't help you. And when you're at the bottom end of the gene pool, He's got to let you go. Now, whether you believe it or not, how many of you heard that a high fiber diet will reduce your risk of colon cancer? Whether you believe it or not, how many of you heard that? Yeah, that's another one of those truisms that the American Cancer Society and your doctor wants you to believe. Of course, Quaker Oats likes that one, right? Low fat diet, high fiber diet. Harvard Nurses Health Study, 90,000 nurses. They compared the rate of colon cancer, these 90,000 nurses, comparing those that had a high fiber diet versus those with a low fiber diet. They didn't like the results, so they threw in 50,000 male doctors. They compared their rate of colon cancer, the ones who had a high fiber diet versus those with a low fiber diet. Now they had 140,000 human subjects, and this came out in January of 1999. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, very respectable medical journal. 90,000 female nurses, 50,000 male doctors. They said high fiber diets don't cut colon cancer by any measurable amount. Zero. Nada. Eating a high fiber diet did not protect you in any way, shape, or form from any cancer. Zero. Why do doctors get so excited about a high fiber diet? Because it will reduce your cholesterol. That's because it absorbs everything that you eat, including minerals that are required to keep you from getting high blood pressure, osteoporosis, arthritis, cancer. And so people who eat multigrain breads for their toast and English muffins and pancakes and waffles for breakfast, people who eat multigrain pastas, people who eat multigrain breads and whole wheat breads and grind their own wheat and all that sort of stuff for their sandwiches, and people who eat whole wheat and multigrain bread for dinner, they eat whole wheat ice cream. I mean, you can go to extreme, right? They have a 500% increase in risk of all these other degenerative diseases which kill you. So by eating a high fiber diet, your risk of those other diseases goes up and doesn't affect your risk of cancer at all. The only thing the doctors get excited about, really, about a high fiber diet is it lowers your cholesterol. And does that do anything for you? No. Doesn't do a thing. You reduce your risk of colon cancer by 60 to 80% by eating dark berries, raspberries, black raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, black cherries, strawberries, according to the Ohio University. Big study by Ohio University. Reduce your risk of colon cancer by 60 to 80%. How many of you ever heard of the trace mineral selenium? Good. How many of you heard the trace mineral selenium is a great antioxidant that's going to reduce your risk of cancer, whether you believe it or not? How many of you heard that? Okay, well, this has been kind of a recent thing. They're kind of growing crazy over selenium. In fact, the information on selenium really came out in April of 1912 in this very famous medical journal called Popular Mechanics. April of 1912. And this fellow here, Professor Dr. von Wassermann from Berlin, who went on about 10 years later to get a Nobel Prize in medicine, said that he had discovered a chemical substance that will cure cancer in mice. It turns out it's the trace mineral selenium. The selenium has a selective action against cancer cells but doesn't hurt healthy tissues. Dr. Wassermann believed that the cancer in mice were so similar to those in humans that he believed an important advance had been made towards the cure of that veritable scourge cancer in people. Well, this was April of 1912. We began to put the trace mineral selenium into animal feed pellets back in April of 1912 to keep their rate of cancer down. And this lay dormant for 84 years in human medicine and nutrition until December of 1996. When a study came out, it was a 7-year study done by Dr. Larry Clark, an MD, PhD from the University of Arizona School of Medicine. He took half of a group of 1,300 people, gave them 200 micrograms over 7 years, 200 micrograms of this trace mineral selenium every day for 7 years. And to make a long story short, at the end of the study, his final analysis showed that he slashed the occurrence, not the risk, but the actual occurrence of prostate cancer by 69%. Are there any drugs that will do that? Will doing a prostate exam and taking your PSA, your prostate-specific antigen blood test every year, will that prevent prostate cancer by 69%? No. He reduced the actual occurrence of colorectal cancer by 64%. He reduced it by 75% by taking a multivitamin. He reduced the actual occurrence of lung cancer by 39%, whether you smoke or not. About 90% of lung cancer occurs in people who never smoked. Smoking is not the cause of lung cancer. It's inhaling all the fumes when you fry food is the biggest single cause of lung cancer. All those free radicals coming out of that margarine you're frying with. How could Ruth get lung cancer? She was a good church-going lady, never cussed, never even hung around smokers. How did she get lung cancer? But she was there early, every noon after church, frying food for everybody. Oh, the best part of the story is, 2 months after this result came out, Dr. Larry Clark died of prostate cancer at age 52. Now, why did that happen? Well, because he had set this study up to show that selenium didn't work. He hated selenium. He set the study up to prove that it wouldn't work, and he wouldn't take it. And the sick part about this is, he was a professor of medicine at the medical school at the University of Arizona, so he taught his beliefs to all the medical students there. And when he died of prostate cancer, they all said, oh, what a tragedy, and then went on avoiding selenium. They'll tell their patients not to take selenium. This came out March 6, 2002. Study says a diet rich in tomatoes can cut the risk of prostate cancer, raw tomatoes, by 24 to 36%. If you eat tomatoes cooked, 1 serving a day of cooked tomato will reduce your risk of prostate cancer by 52 to 60%. Because there's an antioxidant in tomatoes called lycopenes. Lycopenes. I love this when it came out in September of 1998. Call green tea the cure-all of cure-alls. Why is that important? Why do we have 85% more cancer than the Japanese? Well, our national drink is Coca-Cola. Their national drink is green tea. And green tea contains an antioxidant, catechins, or EGCGs, that are 100 times more potent than vitamin C in neutralizing free radicals. Catechins and EGCGs in green tea are 100 times more potent than vitamin C in neutralizing free radicals. And perhaps 100 times more potent than vitamin C in reducing your risk of cancer. Diabetes. An epidemic disease in the United States. There's 1 million new cases of diabetes every year. There's 32 million diabetics as we speak right now in America. 30 million of the 32 million diabetics are adult-onset type 2 diabetics. They make up the bulk of the diabetic population. And adult-onset type 2 diabetics make more insulin than non-diabetics. So there's not an insulin problem with them. And usually if you're asking about insulin, say, well, I've got insulin. How can I be a diabetic? And so doctors say, well, you've got insulin-resistant diabetes. Because it's not working. The reason why it's not working is you're deficient in 2 trace minerals, chromium and vanadium, and their cofactors necessary for them to work, which are required by your insulin to work in your body. You can make tons of insulin, but if you don't have those trace minerals, your insulin's not going to work. We learned in 1957 that we could prevent and cure adult-onset type 2 diabetes in laboratory animals, pet animals, and farm animals by giving them these 2 trace minerals and their cofactors. This lay dormant for 20 years in human medicine until 1977, when they found out that they could give intravenous chromium and vanadium and their cofactors to people who had diabetes, and they were unconscious from head injuries. They were in a coma. And they were miraculously cured by giving them intravenously these trace minerals and their cofactors. Now, you can't say that, oh, well, they just believed that they were going to get cured because they were going to get cured because they're in a coma. They didn't know what was going on. Now, how come your doctor doesn't tell you this stuff? I mean, it's been proven over and over and over in animals. It's been proven over and over and over in people. It's been published in every big medical journal in America and in the world. It sort of comes through every couple of years as renewed, people look at it. It's not like it's a mystery. Every doctor knows this. Why don't doctors tell you this? Well, if a doctor took the less than 2 minutes that I just shared with you, this information, he might get $80 for a long visit, an extended visit, instead of $50 for a standard visit. Make an extra $30. According to the GAO, the General Accounting Office, which is the budget watchdog for the U.S. Congress, your doctor makes, over the 25 to 40 years a diabetic lives after diagnosis, your doctor makes $750,000 for every diabetic patient. So why would he take $30 when he can make $750,000? And most people say, well, my doctor belongs to my church. I got to believe in him. Well, don't let that protect you. Even members of the mafia go to church, right? So I wouldn't bet on that one. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 100 years ago, Americans were eating a half a pound of sugar per person per year. A half a pound of sugar per person per year. Today, 100 years later, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Americans are eating 157 pounds of sugar per person per year, or now we're eating a half a pound a day. So in 100 years, we've gone from a half a pound of sugar per person per year to a half a pound of sugar per person per day. That, plus the deficiency of these nutrients in our food, has resulted in this epidemic of diabetes. Do you think our genetics has changed that much? I don't think so. If you look in the book Rare Earths Forbidden Cures, one of our books, the guy who's doing all this study on these two trace minerals back in the 1950s, actually, Dr. Walter Mertz, went back into the 1940s and began to look at chromium levels in American blood, and he found out there was a big range in 1948, micrograms per liter of parts per billion, 28 to 1,000. In 1971, it dropped to 13. In 72, it dropped to 10. In 73, our chromium levels in our blood dropped to 4.7 to 5.1. In 74, it dropped to 0.73 to 1.6. In 78, it dropped to 0.16. Is it going up or down? It's dropping like a rock. Well, in 1980, it went up 3 times over 1978 values to 0.43. Why did that happen? Remember 1977? They're publishing all these papers on how chromium and vanadium was good for you. And so everybody was taking chromium vanadium. They were running to health food stores and taking it. And so everybody's blood levels of chromium vanadium went up. But because they couldn't cure diabetes with chromium vanadium without all those other cofactors, in 1985 it went back down to 0.13 because people got frustrated because it wouldn't work if you just use those 2 trace minerals without the other cofactors. So between not having enough of these nutrients, the chromium and vanadium and their cofactors in our food anymore, and eating all this sugar, more sugar, less chromium, vanadium, we have an epidemic. We have an epidemic of adult onset type 2 diabetes. The last one we're going to talk about is arthritis and osteoporosis. Arthritis and osteoporosis. According to the Center for Disease Control, 85% of all Americans over the age of 50 already have arthritis and osteoporosis of one type or another, or to one degree or another. There's not a single medical treatment designed to prevent or fix it. Aspirin, Celebrex, Vioxx, Tylenol, ibuprofen, Advil, Aleve, methotrexate, gold shots, prednisone, cortisone. None of those prevent or cure osteoporosis and arthritis. They all have terrible side effects, many of which are life-threatening. And what makes this really, really, really bad, ladies and gentlemen, we learned how to prevent and cure osteoporosis and arthritis in animals over 300 years ago. Now, we didn't know all the biochemical reasons why these approaches worked, but we knew in the last 75 years the biochemical reasons why these little nutritional formulas worked. But we knew how to prevent and cure osteoporosis and arthritis in animals for over 300 years, in some societies, 1,000 years. And your doctor is still trying to just give you painkillers and doing surgery. How many of you heard of arthroscopic surgery of the knee for arthritis? Yeah, it's a very common procedure now. This came out in July of 2002. Arthroscopic knee surgery for arthritis is a worthless procedure. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. How many of you know somebody who's had arthroscopic surgery of the knee? Yeah. Well, if you have arthroscopic surgery of the knee for arthritis, that doesn't deal with the systemic problem that's going on, right? Just one little knee. And, of course, doctors in 2001, and there's only like maybe 5,000 doctors out of the 1 million doctors who do this procedure, their income for that one procedure in 2001 was $1.5 billion. Now, do you think they'll ever give up that procedure? No. It's been proven to be worthless, published in the New England Journal of Medicine as a worthless procedure. When there are cures available, so they're not going to use the nutritional approach. They're not going to use the nutritional approach. They're going to use arthroscopic surgery of the knee because that's worth $1.5 billion to them. And so you have to be smart enough. When your doctor says, look, you've got bone-to-bone arthritis of your knee. In the old days, we'd have to go right to the joint replacement surgery. But right now, we've got arthroscopic surgery of the knee, and we can take out those little floating bits of bone and cartilage. And then when that doesn't work anymore, we'll eventually have to go to the joint replacement surgery. But right now, we might be able to preserve your knee for a year or two. You have to be strong enough to say, look, doc, you're a quack. How many people did you kill last month? The New England Journal of Medicine, July 2002, said this procedure is worthless. Now, we've been friends for a long time. We belong to the same church, and you're coming to me with a worthless procedure? I don't think I'm going to visit you anymore. You have to rebel sometime. When they keep taking advantage of you to milk your insurance policy and milk your wallet, when do you rebel? You rebel when you realize that your doctor is only looking at you as a source of income. If you follow your doctor's advice when you have osteoporosis and arthritis, you're going to wind up like this. Yahoo! Now, whether you believe it or not, how many of you have ever heard that osteoporosis is primarily a postmenopausal woman's problem? Whether you believe it or not, how many of you heard that? Sure, everybody knows. Oprah, your doctor, the government, everybody knows that osteoporosis is primarily a postmenopausal woman's problem. Well, we knew 100 years ago that osteoporosis actually occurred equally in both men and women. It only became a postmenopausal woman's problem in 1958 when they came out with HRT. Because can you justify treating osteoporosis and preventing osteoporosis with estrogen if both men and women get it at the same rate? No, you couldn't. Can you imagine a red-blooded American man, a red-blooded Idahoan, going to his doctor and say, okay, doc, I've got that osteoporosis stuff. I want you to shoot me up with that estrogen. I've had estrogen today. They're not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. People tend to be basically smart, right? Well, this came out in November of 2001. Osteoporosis strikes both sexes equally. Men are as likely as women to suffer from osteoporosis. The surprise findings, well, why was this a surprise finding? Well, because all the doctors who did that study only graduated after the 1958 time period, and the truth they were taught was that osteoporosis occurs primarily in postmenopausal women. Results turn the tables on the belief that women are the prime victims of the condition. The findings of the Canadian Multi-Center Osteoporosis Study, a program involving almost 10,000 participants in 9 centers, will almost certainly change the way that medical professionals deal with unexplained bone fractures in men and the way education about the condition is handled. Now, raise your hand, gentlemen, if you have received a direct communication from your medical doctor, either an email, a postcard, a phone call, saying, look, come on in. I've just learned that osteoporosis occurs equally in both men and women. I'm so excited about this because I can help you before something bad happens. Come on in, we'll do a bone density test. How many of you men have gotten that communication from your medical doctors? Look at that. None. As I traveled around the world, 18 countries in the last 3 years, not a single man has raised their hand. Now you say, well, why would that be? Why wouldn't doctors want to tell their men patients? You'd think they'd be excited. If they're altruistic and they're out there to help you, they'd be wanting to give you this information, right? Well, guess what would happen? Every woman would immediately stop using HRT. And they're making so much money from the kickbacks and writing the prescriptions from HRT, they're afraid to rock the boat. They don't want to start anything that's going to rock the boat. So any doctor who today continues to write prescriptions for women for HRT should be put in jail for 25 years of life without possibility of parole. And that would be the kindest of treatments that I would figure for them. Ladies, when your doctor comes to you and says, I want you to take estrogen for osteoporosis, you can say, Doc, you take it for 25 years. And then, if it works, I'll take it. See what he says. One of the other things you have to do besides taking all the raw materials to rebuild your bone and cartilage and ligaments and tendons and connective tissue is to give up carbonated drinks. Carbonated drinks are the single greatest contributor to osteoporosis and arthritis and fractures of the bone. They interfere with the absorption of nutrients, especially minerals, digesting protein. This actually, the original study was done 10 years before this at the Harvard Nurses Health Study, 90,000 nurses, 20 years of data, and these were all nurses over age 35. They found out that the nurses drinking carbonated drinks, soft drinks, even diet drinks, instead of water during the day, had a 500% increase in risk of osteoporosis and fractures over the water drinking group. So they went and did the study in junior high school girls, 460 junior high school girls in 9th and 10th grade. They found out that the same thing was exactly true for them. Why did they only look at nurses and girls? Because they believed it was primarily a woman's disease. But believe me, it occurs in boys too. So if you have young athletes, whether they're girls or boys, if you have osteoporosis in your family or arthritis, if you have it or don't want to get it, you got to give up carbonated drinks. Doctors should be telling you this every time you walk in the door. You got to give up carbonated drinks. I'll answer questions in just a moment. I just want to remind you that if you don't take care of your own destiny, if you don't take hold of things and take control of your own destiny, life is going to take care of your destiny for you, and usually it's not very nice. And so if you take control and rebel a little bit, be one of those mean, feisty little people that defy their doctor, but you have to do it with education. You just can't do something bad. You have to know what you're doing, educate yourself, and the odds are you're going to save yourselves an enormous amount of unnecessary misery. You're going to save yourselves a gob of money, and you're going to add many, many, many healthful years to your life. It will definitely help you to educate yourself. Education is power. Education with action is superpower. Don't let somebody else, even a doctor, determine your future. You've got to make those determinations yourself.
Information and statements regarding dietary supplements discussed have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.